All right. Thank you all for joining us from the Head First team to talk a little bit about college recruiting during the coronavirus. And specifically, there are two areas that we're going to focus. One is how have recent events impacted recruiting, and specifically recruiting at high academic schools to some degree, and then also what can prospective student athletes, current high school ball players do right now to continue to advance their recruiting despite this disruption in the process that we're all feeling. So first up, some introductions. You're seeing two of our faces, but some quick introductions. Matt, could you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. And if I do have some internet issues, just let me know, Max. But my name is Matt Sternberg. I'm the Director of Business Development for the Honor Roll and Top 96 Showcase camps. I've been with Head First for more than 5 years, and it's been an amazing experience working with a lot of families. I see a lot on here already that we're currently working with, and those that we've done in the past really help educate and put student athletes in a really good position moving forward. That's exactly what we're here for. These are unprecedented times that I have never seen, Max has never seen, we've never seen, but we've certainly been working hard to provide and help give you the answers and some more guidance on what you can be doing. So thank you all for being here. One note, I know Max can say the same thing. Since we are working from home, I have a dog that loves to bark. So if you hear that, I will try to mute as quickly as I can.
Thank you for covering that, Matt. You beat me to it. My name is Max McKenna. I'm our Senior Manager of Marketing for Head First Showcases. I went to Amherst College and played baseball there, where I graduated in 2011 after a career there as a pitcher. Went into coaching and teaching at the high school level for a handful of years, first at Phillips Andover Academy up in Massachusetts, where I was a teaching fellow in history and an assistant baseball coach, and then down to a small private school outside New York City, just north of the Bronx, called the Masters School, where I was the head baseball coach and a history teacher there as well. Similar to Matt, I have a dog, so if you hear whining or barking in the background, apologies, but these are certainly a piece of these things. I'm sure you've been on other webinars where you've seen a kid or a pet make an appearance in the background. So Matt and I will try to mute quickly if that happens, but just fair warning. Kevin.
Hi, my name is Kevin Keene. I'm the Associate of Marketing for Head First Showcases. I actually attended Head First Honor Roll as a rising senior back in 2012. I was originally recruited to play baseball at Dickinson prior to transferring to NYU. During my time at NYU, I interned for Head First twice and also worked with the Brooklyn Nets basketball operations department. I came back to Head First in October of 2018 and working full-time doing marketing ever since. No dog in my household, so it should be all quiet from my end.
Perfect. And Kevin is going to be the one who is compiling those questions as they come in. So you won't see him on the screen. He won't be a part of the main presentation, but during the Q&A, we'll be hearing from him. So I just didn't want that new voice to come as a shock. In the vein of questions, as I mentioned, you can type in your questions over the course of this entire presentation, find that questions tab, fire them away. We're going to collect those and ask those of the panel at the end of the presentation, just to make sure we don't cover something. So feel free to type them in as they come up to you, but we'll be addressing those at the end. If it's a personal follow-up or if it's a question that is very specific to you or your ball player, certainly feel free to put it in there, and we will likely follow up with you today or tomorrow or by the end of the week with a phone call or with an email just to touch base and make sure that you're getting that answer. But also we want to make sure that the questions on this webinar are more broadly applicable to everybody who's attending. So first up, here's the agenda for what we're going to talk through, and we kind of covered this briefly. It's really these two main bullets, those first two. What are the impacts of current events on the recruiting process? What does it mean for student athletes who are going through this or are beginning this process now? What can student athletes do right now to advance their recruiting? And then we'll also put you guys in touch with some additional resources online, and as well as some other folks that we look to in the college admissions and baseball space. And then we're going to take as much time as possible and as long as we need to for the live Q&A at the end of it. So first up, impacts on the recruiting process. As I'm sure many of you have heard, if not all of you, there have been recent decisions made by the NCAA at the end of March, beginning of April, just a couple weeks ago, that do impact recruiting. So the NCAA Division I Council decisions that are particularly relevant here are regarding eligibility extensions, roster cap waivers, and then the scholarship situation for the 2021 season. So because of the cancellation or the suspension of the 2020 spring season, the NCAA granted a one-year eligibility extension to all spring student athletes. Up until March 30th, when there were discussions about this, it was unclear if they were going to do it just for seniors or if it was going to apply to all student athletes or if they were going to do it at all. They came out and granted a one-year eligibility extension to all student athletes participating at the discretion of each individual school as well. The NCAA has granted it top down, but it is still also with each school and program to talk with their student athletes about which of them are coming back specifically for next year and what their scholarship situation would be. This obviously has some cascading impacts and effects that stem from this. The first and foremost being the roster cap. In Division I baseball, there's a hard roster cap of 35 student athletes on the roster. Only 27 of them can be on scholarship, which we'll touch on in a second. The NCAA has said that for next year, so for the 2021 spring season, they're giving a waiver in the number of seniors that return. So basically a college program, let's say TCU, if they have 9 current seniors who are graduating this spring but may or may not come back next year, their roster could be as big as 44 instead of that 35-man cap. So the number of seniors that return is the number of players that a program is allowed to go over that 35 roster spot cap for the 2021 season. One note on these roster cap waivers is that so far the NCAA has extended this for the 2021 season. It is not clear if it will continue beyond then, although the indicators that I have heard so far have said that likely it will not. It will be a one-year waiver on the roster cap. So back in the 2022 season, and we'll talk about the impacts of this to the 2021, 2022 recruiting classes, it will be back to that 35-man cap for each Division I roster. Also, for a one-year waiver is the 11.7 scholarships and the 27 counters that each program gets as well. So senior scholarships will not count towards the 11.7 scholarships that each fully funded baseball program is allowed to have, and each senior on scholarship will not count towards the maximum of 27 players on scholarship on each roster. Now, the situation of each program is certainly different and is being kind of managed by each individual program. Some programs are having conversations with their seniors saying, hey, we can bring you back at exactly the same scholarship that you were at this year, or we can't give you a scholarship, or we're giving you a piece of the scholarship. Each program has the option to bring back their seniors at the same scholarship level that they had this year, or less. So if you were on a 50% scholarship, for example, at a Vanderbilt, you can come back as a fifth-year senior at 50% or under. They can't all of a sudden increase your scholarship to 75, 80%, just because it's not counting towards the 11.7 scholarships in the roster, but they can decrease it. And some schools, certainly for budgetary purposes, are taking advantage of that and are, dropping some players' scholarships just from the financial side of things. One important note on this as well is that the NCAA gave this eligibility extension across divisions. Eligibility was extended for Division III athletes as well, but Division III teams and programs do not have the hard roster cap like Division I does. So while a Division I program has a hard maximum of 35 players on a roster, Division III teams do not have that hard roster. So some are smaller, some are larger, some programs run JV teams or developmental teams, that kind of thing. So it's important to keep in touch with the schools that are on your list as you research them. Keep in touch with what their roster situation is. Also different about the Division III, as I'm sure most of you know, no scholarships. So that budgeting side of things is less of an impact for Division III programs as well.
One thing to jump in here is you also have to look at the type of school that that's going to be affected by this, right? So for the under our Head First Showcase brand, the Head First Honor Roll camps, there's a lot of these higher academic schools that are there where there's a lot of kids that are graduating and they've been working towards getting a job that next fall. So, as much as they want to come back and play baseball for another year, and it breaks our hearts as it does everybody's that their senior season was ripped away, they're not going to necessarily say, you know what, I'm going to come back because I actually got a job offer in Chicago or New York City or wherever that is. And so it really will, like you had mentioned earlier, depend school by school. So it's not just a blanket statement for all Division I schools, because not all Division I schools are equal when it comes to academics as well as baseball programs.
Absolutely. And I mean, case in point there being the Ivy League. So the Ivy League, Division I program, the NCAA would have granted all of the Brown seniors or Harvard seniors, they would have had that extra year of eligibility. But there's a rule specific to the Ivy League where they cannot have graduate students on their rosters, and they are standing by that. So they said, yes, the NCAA granted you a one-year eligibility extension for seniors, but if you're a senior on the Brown roster, you cannot come back and play your fifth year here. So if you look at, there are on d1baseball.com, which is a resource we'll touch on, there's a transfer portal, and there are kind of buyers and sellers in that transfer market. And one of the big ones being the Ivy League programs who cannot return their seniors for a fifth year. So to illustrate Matt's point, it's going to vary program by program, or in some cases league by league. Also interesting on the Division III side, for example, at Amherst College, no graduate programs to attend, so it's pretty tough for a kid to stick around for a fifth year if it wasn't already part of their academic track, because there isn't a law school or a business school or a medical school to be enrolling in. So depending on the program, it's going to be handled very differently. Also depends on the school and what they have availability for academically as well.
Hey, let me jump in to go back, because there's some really good questions coming in. So let's let Kevin jump in maybe with one or two that really can address some of these, the bullet points that you just laid out. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So I think, on the points that Max just brought up, this one works really well. Max, is it reasonable to think that, colleges will now start recruiting maybe from those seniors who have an extra year of eligibility rather than high school kids?
This is such a good question, and I've talked with a lot of coaches about this. It's a great question. It unfortunately does not have a simple, clean yes/no answer. And again, it's going to vary by the program. There, as I mentioned, there are buyers and sellers in that transfer portal. All Ivy League programs are sellers because they are not returning. So kids are going from their programs to others. Other programs are going to be more on the buy side of that. Some of those mid-major schools that might want to up their game for 1 year, and a William and Mary or a Richmond could be on there looking to recruit some of those transfers with their additional year. Now, one conversation that I've had with a handful of coaches at the Division III and the Division I level is, even it's tough to shop in that transfer market to some degree, because the on-field impact of a graduate student transfer, a grad transfer, can be really good, but the potential cultural or locker room impact of that same player could be very different. Even if they're a great guy, if you bring a grad transfer into a program and all of a sudden this kid is playing over some of the other kids that you recruited that are younger, what does that mean for the future of your program and also the culture of your program? What is the locker room like for that year where you've brought in this fifth year player who is now going to start over last year's starting shortstop? And also, what does it mean for last year's starting shortstop who is a rising sophomore, rising junior? Are they going to stay in that program if they're less happy with it? So thinking about kind of the cultural and locker room impact of these grad transfers is another layer of depth to what coaches are thinking through, because as this question kind of indicates, it's pretty intuitive to think that it would be really appealing for a coach to go after a proven college player and bring them into the program instead of or on top of a high school senior who is coming into their program out of high school. A little bit, it's much easier to project that grad transfer than it is that high school senior, because they've played at this level or roughly at this level. But thinking through the second order effects of what that means for that program is going to limit that as like the biggest recruiting option for any of these schools. You will see more action in the transfer portal than you previously had. Certainly, we already have. There's something like 250 or 300 transfer requests since the season was suspended, which for this time of year, like that's astronomical. There's a lot of kids in the transfer portal who are looking at transferring to other schools. So there is a lot of kind of liquidity in that market, if you will, to think about it from that perspective. But thinking about it beyond just the on-field performance and thinking about the cultural impact is another really important piece and a really interesting take that I've heard from really every coach that I've spoken with about this exact question.
Great. And another one that's come up a couple times so far, where does Division II fit into all this?
Division two is an interesting kind of in between. They do have scholarships, so they also have some of that. It's fewer than the Division one. They also can accept transfers for the most part. So they would play more along the lines of the Division one. They also have granted the eligibility extensions. They also have some of these waivers on scholarships. We tend to focus at first on the Division one and Division three because that is where a lot of our partner programs and these high academic programs congregate and are mostly kind of concentrated and focused. But the Division two, you can kind of think of it, it roughly plays in line with the Division one decisions and is kind of a scaled down model of the Division one in terms of that eligibility and the scholarships and all that stuff. So another key piece of this is looking division down, Division one, Division two, Division three, NAIA, JUCO, whatever it is going to be a useful first step. But it's also really important that you look at the specific programs that you are looking at, whether it's, Hillsdale in Michigan, great Division two school, high academics, they have attended our camps. What is their position relative to a different Division two or one or three program that's out there as well?
Great. Some other good questions coming in. I think we should probably save these for later in the presentation.
Well, we could be here for 5 hours max if we don't keep it moving.
Hey, I don't have anything to do today, so we're good. We're going to roll it. Next up is, so a couple weeks ago, we talked with travel coaches about some of the same stuff, but it was before these decisions have been made about the eligibility and about the scholarship waivers and everything else. So now we can talk a little bit more concretely about what the recruiting impacts of these decisions are going to be. And I separated this into two different buckets. There's committed student athletes, whether they be 2020s or 2021s, or uncommitted student athletes in the 2021 class and younger. So the class of 2020, as we mentioned, there's a waiver for the roster cap, for the scholarships, et cetera, for next season at the Division I level. Probably mostly because these 2020 commits have an NLI, a National Letter of Intent, which is binding in the NCAA's eyes. So a student athlete cannot renege on that NLI, a program cannot renege on that NLI. So they are committed to this volume of student athletes. That is why, in my mind, from my perspective, and the way that I see it, that is a big part of why the NCAA has granted a 1-year waiver, is that they understand that Vanderbilt, for example, is already committed to these 10 or 12 incoming freshmen, and they had these commitments to these graduating seniors who now have an extra year of eligibility. And so balancing that out without compromising the integrity of the NLI was a really compelling reason for them to extend the waiver for the 2021 season. So for 2020 commits who have this NLI, it will impact their experience at school. But I would be very surprised if you see any kind of dropping of this recruiting class or any decommits in that phase of things. Where you will see a change for 2020s is on the size of the roster that they're walking into and the competition for playing time, which we'll certainly talk on a bit later as well. But for 2020s, they were expecting to walk onto a roster that was capped at 35 players. If there are 8 seniors and they're all returning, they might now be walking into a roster that is 43 players. Or depending on the school, if you look at some of these, a TCU, a Texas, a UCLA, where they expect to lose some of their players, their recruits and their eligible sophomores, juniors, and seniors to the draft, to the MLB draft, which also has its own changes that kind of cascade through this. You might see a bit of a swollen roster there and a roster crunch over the next couple of years. And so there might be some more red shirts or more activity in the transfer portal as we talked on. But and there will be increased competition for jobs for next spring as well, jobs for starting positions, which isn't a difference. It's not a huge change or a categorical change in what you're walking into. If you're walking onto campus in the fall, you are expected to be competing for a job. It's just a matter of how many guys are trying to beat you out for it. If you're walking onto a roster of 35, competition is one thing. If you're walking onto a roster of 43, there's a few more people vying for some of the same spots and ways to help the team. So that's the biggest impact that we're kind of seeing at the 2020 level. For 2021, they have not reached the signing period of their recruiting process. And the NCAA does not recognize verbal commitments, which are common practice in the recruiting space, specifically in all sports, but especially in baseball, where you do lose some kids to the draft every year. Verbal commitments are a really important piece of the recruiting puzzle for programs and for student athletes. But because they aren't recognized as binding or official from the NCAA, they don't carry the same weight as those 2020 commits who have signed a document that is binding saying, I'm going to Vanderbilt, I'm going to TCU. So this is where the extension of the roster cap and the scholarship waivers beyond the 2021 season could really impact the 2021 class of recruits. Because while it doesn't seem likely that it will extend beyond, so that means that there will be a roster crunch. You will see some decommits in this class. I would imagine if I had to guess, you will see some decommits here, which is also always the case. I mean, when we talk about verbal commits, we often say to families who are and student athletes who are going through this, we say the verbal commitment it's a great landmark and it's an incredible win and outcome in your recruiting process. It is reliant. It's a handshake deal that is reliant on your relationship with the coach and the integrity of the person on the other side of that deal. That hasn't changed. It's just there's a bit more pressure coming in both directions now for coaches. So you might see some decommits there, but it's an important, if you're on this and you are a verbally committed 2021, build that relationship, focus on the relationship with the coaches that recruited you, and focus on communicating with them effectively so that you know where you stand. They might have to communicate some bad news to you, but it's better that they be open about that. The coaches be upfront with you so that you can then shift your planning or shift what you need to do next to make sure that you're still looking for your outcome. The impact on uncommitted players for 2021s, 22s, 23s, et cetera, those who are going through, entering the heart of, or just beginning their recruiting process, you could see impacts in the recruiting process for both roster size and scholarship amount available at the Division I level, because all 4 years of college have an extra year of eligibility. There could be a current sophomore or freshman who does stick around for a fifth year. So the ramifications of that extra year of eligibility will work its way through the system over the next couple of years, but it won't be after the 2021 season, things return purely to normal. So you could be walking onto a roster that is a little bit has some extra pieces, or you might see smaller recruiting classes during some of these, depending on how many of these kids are coming back to return to their college programs. And you also could see a crunch in the scholarship dollars available. As you mentioned, their coaches are limited. Division I programs are limited to 11.7 scholarships at a fully funded program, and they can divide those up among 27 kids. So for scholarship availability to stay under that 11.7 cap in the 2021 recruiting class for the 2022 season, if there isn't a waiver for scholarships and roster size, then you might see more kind of incremental scholarships. Instead of getting 50% to a couple kids, you'll get 25% just to stand under that cap. And there will be fewer dollars available because they'll be going to some of those kids who are coming in as transfers, maybe going to those kids who are staying on for a fifth year, and also going to their incoming recruiting classes as well. Go ahead, Matt.
A couple of questions come in just about the kind of the cascading effects, as we just touched upon a little bit. of the fact that when do you think this is going to normalize in terms of kind of getting back, and how much will this look alike next year than it will in 2 years from now and 3 years from now, and then eventually when the eighth graders are going to be freshmen, when this kind of goes back to normal?
Great question. Not a super clean or simple answer, unfortunately, because it will, as we've been saying all along, it will depend on the specific program. It also will depend on the cascading effects of the MLB draft. The MLB draft has to be a minimum of 5 rounds this year and a minimum of 20 rounds next year, which is still less than it usually is at 40 rounds. It's a lot of bodies leaving college campuses to go into the ranks of pro ball. So you'll see fewer kids leave over the next at least 2 years, likely, leaving to go to pro ball, with capped signing bonuses and all this other stuff that's going on at the pro level. This will naturally work itself out over the next 4 years, right? The current freshmen, so the high school class of 2019 is the last class that will have an extra year of eligibility. But as things at the draft and MLB level normalize, it will start to cascade through. So you could see more of a crunch for 2, 3, 4 years, but I think that it will work its way towards normal over that time. So the crunch next year on scholarships and roster size will be more acute than it will be the season after that, will be more acute than it will be the season after that. So I think it will naturally work its way through the system. If I had to guess, again, this is based on current knowledge and trying to project out the future, which is always a little bit tricky, but that is what I would kind of take a guess at, is as things normalize at the pro level, that will start to regulate things at the college level as well, especially when you look at the rosters of some of these Power 5 schools, right? If you're looking at a Vanderbilt or a Michigan or a TCU, you're going to see more kids who are draft ready and are going to be drafted. The impact on our partner programs, so for example, the Ivy League won't feel this impact because they are not going to give any grad extensions for their seniors. So it won't impact their rosters at all. It will impact some of these Power 5 schools. At the Division III level, or at some of these high academic schools, as Matt touched on earlier, if a kid in the class of 2021 has a job in investment banking or a job as a teacher waiting for him on the other side of graduation, what are the chances they're going to trade and say, you know what, I know I have this job waiting for me at Goldman Sachs, but I'm going to come back and put the onus on my parents, because there's no scholarships, remember, to pay another 50 or 60 grand in tuition so I can play a 5th year of college baseball. So at the Division III level, you'll see it. I think you'll see it work itself out quicker, because there will be fewer kids who are looking at this as a viable option, because it will mean an additional year of tuition, student loans, all the stuff that goes with paying for college. And so at the Division III level and at these high academic schools, I think you'll see more kids who are already planning on going to grad school. If you were already planning on going to business school or law school or whatever, and you have this 5th year, sure, you might stick around and play that, because you'll already be at the school if the school allows you to do that. But I think that it will be less of an impact at these sorts of high academic schools than you will see at the Power 5 level. The key takeaways that I think of in these recruiting impacts are these two that you see down at the bottom. And it's really interesting to note that these two key takeaways they're not new. Nothing is different about them. It's just a matter of degree, not category. So it's more important. We always believe that focusing on holistic school fit is the #1 outcome to look for in the college process, whether it's purely academic or whether baseball is involved in it at all. But more than ever, it's important to focus on holistic school fit, because as this past season has demonstrated, a baseball season is not guaranteed, whether it's an injury or a crowded roster that leads to you losing your spot on the team, or a global pandemic. There are things that can impact your baseball experience in college, and so it's really important to think about what are the other pieces of this puzzle that's going to mean that I have not only a great 4 years in college, but also a great outcome on the other side of graduation as well. What's going to set me up for my life after baseball, whether that's when I graduate high school, partway through college, when I graduate college, or after 20 years in the pros? What is going to set me up for the next step and life after baseball. And a big part of that in our mind is focusing on holistic school fit to make sure that you are at the right place with the right overall college experience. The other thing here is to arrive on campus ready to compete for a spot. And that has been the case forever. But as we mentioned, it might be more acute now. You are always arriving as a freshman on campus, trying to compete for a job. You are showing what you have, that you can help the team so that you can take a spot on that roster, a spot on that field. There might be more people competing with you for that spot right now, but it doesn't change the fact that you need to arrive on campus ready to compete at your highest level for a spot. So again, a matter of degree in terms of the pressure that you're feeling to compete, but not a complete difference in your September experience or your arrival on campus as a freshman. Next up, what can student athletes do? So what can we do right now to impact and move forward our recruiting? We're going to focus on 4 areas: physical development, baseball development, academics and test prep, and then your recruiting process as a whole. And all 4 of these areas ladder into, to some degree, the recruiting process or what you can do to advance your recruiting. But that last piece will cover specifically some coach communication next steps that you can take right now as well. Excuse me. The keywords for all of this: motivation, discipline, proactivity, and ask for help. We're going to talk about these 4 areas of focus, but with all of them, we're emphasizing with student athletes and with parents holding student athletes accountable, focusing on these 4 things is going to be really, really, really important. And we'll touch on why. But they're kind of creating an internal structure for some of the stuff that being in season and being in a physical classroom delivered to you naturally, that now you have to do on your own a little bit more. Physical development, the first and most important thing that you can do right now is to stay healthy, both with reference to coronavirus, certainly, but also arm health, knee health, whatever it is, whatever nagging injuries you might have, stay healthy, get better, focus on that, and focus on obviously the public health kind of things that you'll see from the CDC, like staying healthy and staying in a place where you can continue to develop is a really crucial first step. Next up is, right now is a really important time to view this as kind of a pause, but it's really important that you continue to work out from home, to continue your physical development. And there's a great quote from Tim Corbin on this that I would pull to, where they ask him, what is your focus with your players? He says, they don't have access to the same stuff, but they can do a lot of primitive things. There's a lot of things you can do with your body if you move it outside and if you got some creativity. And if I'm looking to a college program for guidance, I think Vanderbilt is a really good place to go. If it is good enough to continue moving forward for the defending national champions, I think it's a great place for high school student athletes to start as well. Really important here, though, is to keep it simple and get creative. You don't have access to the same resources or equipment that you might have in a typical day, but guess what? Baseball players have not always had access to all the things that we have access to today. We haven't always had access to the Rapsodo or the force plate or any of this stuff that now these gadgets that you might be using. If you don't have access to a squat rack, do some goblet squats if you have a dumbbell. If you don't have access to a dumbbell, do some hill sprints to keep your legs in shape and get stronger. There's always something that you can be doing if you're able to keep it simple, work within your restraints, and then get really creative about what you're doing. There also are great resources, especially in this day and age, and more come out of the woodwork. There are a lot of workouts built for being at home. Everybody's stuck at home right now, so nobody has access to the same gym equipment that they might usually have. There's a lot of stuff out there. Finding stuff that is effective for you and can keep you, to that first bullet point, keep you healthy, work within what you need as a baseball player, which might be different than what a football player needs. Finding and recruiting some of these resources online or on social media or wherever you can find it is a really important piece. Work within your constraints, be creative, and recruit the resources around you. There's no need to reinvent the wheel, but you can find a lot of this stuff that can really help you continue to advance physically as a player. And ultimately, whenever this ends, whenever you're able to get back on the field, being in a better physical state than you were going into this quarantine or into this pandemic is the number one thing that you can do to impact your recruiting outcome. The best thing you can do to impact your recruiting outcome is become better as a student athlete. And this is a really important piece of that puzzle.
And Max, to this with the physical development, motivation to me is something that is really tough, especially for a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kid. It's tough for us. It's tough for you parents at home right now. We're sitting here Groundhog Day, day after day. We're trying to come up with things to be able to do. It's really important, especially these leaders, these kids that are going to be leaders. We're going to be leaders on their high school team or captains of their teams. The point of this is we need to make sure that they feel confident in what they're doing and give them the tools to be able to get out there and do some of these things that are very, very different, but keep them motivated, because guess what? The next kid across the country or in the middle of the country is doing that. And so that needs to be your motivation to be able to say, hey, this will eventually open up. What are you going to be doing now with the tools that we have that we're going to be sharing? That you can be doing day in and day out to get yourself in a good mindset, but also, like you said, your body healthy, and improve day after day after day.
Absolutely. And motivation, discipline are so crucial, because if you've spent the last 3 years working out once a week with a personal trainer, guess what? That trainer's not there to hold you accountable right now in the same way that they were before. So you holding yourself accountable, your teammates holding each other accountable, staying motivated and staying disciplined is absolutely crucial. And also, understandably, as Matt touched on, very, very difficult, especially for teenagers who have a lot of other things that are going on in their lives as well. Next up is in-game and baseball development. And you'll keep seeing this in bold throughout this, but keeping it simple, getting creative is going to be really important. One thing that is going to be difficult for all student athletes when you come out of this is no one will have seen live pitching for the most part since their last game this spring, whether that was in early April or early March, or they never got on a field. If they're from where I'm from, up in Boston, they might not have seen live pitching. It's important that as you are working on your fundamentals and getting your drills and reps in, try to make them as game-like as possible. Focus on making things difficult. Don't just take mindless reps off of a tee. How can you make it more difficult, more game-like? If you're doing soft toss, how do you mix in a 2-ball drill to simulate an off-speed pitch that you typically don't see? It's not just about getting reps in to pummel the tarp or pummel the back of the tunnel. It's about keeping yourself sharp for game ready action whenever it is that comes about. So gamifying your reps, making them fun to stay invested and activated during them, but also making them more difficult for yourself and introduce kind of variability and as many things as you can to make them harder so that you are ready when the time comes. Which brings us to the second point. 2 phrases I heard quite a bit in my freshman year of college coming out of the pen from a great mentor of mine, who's now a coach up at Phillips Andover. Stay ready to get ready to stay ready. And if there are pitchers out there who have worked out of the bullpen, I'm sure this seems fairly familiar. But the idea here is right now, you need to make sure that when you come out of this, you are ready to hit the ground running. Right now, you're not going to be getting live pitching reps if you're a hitter, or you're not going to be throwing to live hitters if you're a pitcher. But the stuff that you do now, if you introduce some variability and difficulty to your drills, you're going to be ready to accelerate your reacclimation curve once things do open up. And if you set yourself up now, you can be ready more quickly once things do open up. And that's a really, really important piece of this is stay ready to get ready to stay ready.
Jumping in on that piece, I think what's important as well is, yes, do everything you can to make sure that you are ready to, when the time is to step on the field, step back in the gym, everything like that. But also reassure your student athletes, or for those student athletes that are on here, that everybody is on a level playing field right now. So nobody is able to go out there and do this. So it's not as though if you live in New York as opposed to California or vice versa, one set of student athletes is seeing live pitching right now, or being able to get out there. You're not. So coaches understand that, and we're going to touch upon that in a little bit. but student athletes needs to realize that as well, is that it's not going to look the same when we do get back out there. We're not going to look as great as we normally do. So I think that's important to reassure people, because, you know, it's something that in your mind, you just want to say, okay, I'm doing everything in my power that I can be doing.
Absolutely, and this was a topic of conversation. We posted a conversation interview with Chris Gordon, the assistant coach at Duke, a while back, and this is one of the things that he talked about. He was like, "Look, when our staff gets back out on the road to recruit, whenever that is, June, July, August, whatever it is, they're fully aware that the kids that they watch in the first game of a tournament or at a showcase, they will not have seen live pitching since March or February. So they have that mindset. And so the way that they're thinking about it is, how do we look at a kid and look at his fundamentals and look at the data and analytics and video and get a good sense of him, but also keep an open mind that the first time we watch him, this kid might be pretty rusty. And then, so start with an open mind, and then quickly and with a complete knowledge set, start to narrow the funnel on those kids. So everybody's in the same place, as Matt mentioned. Coaches are also in that same place and also know that. They know that on whatever, June 20th, when they show up at a perfect game tournament and they're watching a kid hit and they look foolish on a curveball, they're not going to be that surprised. It might be that it was a filthy curveball. It might be that that hitter was rusty. And coaches have that kind of array of outcomes in mind as they go. Another important piece, and I was talking with a travel coach friend of mine a while ago, or earlier this week, about this is a really good time to get and stay healthy. I mean, I think that one thing that we see a lot at our camps, because we see so many student athletes come through, is we see some repetitive stress issues come up, especially for pitchers, but not just for pitchers, right? Arm health, knee health. You're spending all your time doing some of the same actions. Right now, you aren't, right? And so building in rest periods and keeping yourself healthy so that you are ready when things open up is a really, really important piece, and can't be overstated. Now I would expect at our camps in August, for example, we see a lot of kids who have thrown 100 innings over the course of the summer, and then they're showing up to their showcase. And for some of them, that means that they're really, really ready. For some of them, it means that they've had some wear and tear on their arm over the course of the season that doesn't necessarily put them at their best for that moment. So the way that we think about things at Head First is obstacles open opportunities, or the obstacle's the way. Yes, it's devastating that you guys aren't getting to play your season right now, but it does open up the opportunity for you to get and stay healthy if you're putting in the physical work, if you are getting the proper band work or long toss work or whatever it is, but you aren't getting the same wear and tear of full speed game reps. Finding the balance between those things so that you are able to peak at the right time when the eyes are watching, when the eyes are on you, but also staying healthy and really building in the longevity of, especially what comes to mind for me with this is pitchers and arms and young arms, especially their proclivities for getting wear and tear. It's terrible that the season is going on, but it is a great opportunity to keep your arm healthy and get it to an even healthier spot with the proper strength work and long toss and bands and whatever it is that your high school or travel program has you on. Similar to physical development right here, keep it simple, get creative. One of my favorite pictures that I've received during this entire thing is this one. Our friends over at Blast Motion sent this over to us. We partner with them to offer blast sensors to anybody who wants to purchase them, and that data gets passed along to coaches, which is great. But this is the favorite thing that I have that they've done for us so far. This is a student athlete's bedroom in Brooklyn, New York, small 2-bedroom apartment. Anybody who lives in or has been in New York knows how small some of those apartments can be. Tee, wiffle ball, weighted the wiffle ball down with a rope so that you can, hits it, doesn't break a window, doesn't take things out, doesn't put a dent in the wall, get back onto it. The unique thing about this is that this player was also using the blast sensor on his bat so that specifically could get feedback from each swing and use that data-driven feedback and immediate feedback to take a look at not just what was the flight of the ball, but what was my input, what was my attack angle, what was my rotational force, all these different things. So whether or not you have a blast sensor is irrelevant to this. Being creative, being simple with the restrictions that you have is a really key part to getting better right now. So mom and dad, close your ears. I'm sorry I'm about to say this, but if you're an infielder, there should be some, tennis balls off walls in the living room or outside. Find a wall of the house that you can use to work backhand, work short hops, work your techniques and your fundamentals in a way that previously maybe you had access to better or more complete resources to do it, but you still can work on these things in a stripped down way to still continue to get better and stay sharp. So focus on what you can do and how you can still make strides. And think creative, think problems, think like an engineer, like this kid did. Tie a wiffle ball down to a 3-pound hand weight and get after it in your bedroom. Next up is academics and standardized test prep. And this is nothing that student athletes don't know, but something that, to those earlier points about motivation and discipline and asking for help, it might be tougher for kids to do right now. You have to keep your foot on the gas in the classroom. It can be tempting because it's a digital classroom, or you're not interacting with your peers or with your teacher in the same way as you normally would during a normal school day or school year. It can be pretty appealing to kind of let up and say, I don't necessarily need to listen or be as engaged in this Zoom classroom as I do when I'm actually sitting there and the teacher could, walk over to my desk and wrap my knuckles with a ruler. You have to keep your foot on the gas in the classroom, though, because even if, as a lot of schools are doing right now, even if your school has moved to a pass-fail for this semester, just skating by and getting a pass is not going to set you up for success for next semester. And guess what? Next semester's math is going to build off this semester's math in most cases. So keeping your foot on the gas in the classroom is going to set you up for success right now, but also for the next things that come down the line. Again, your transcript with whether it's a pass fail or a letter grade for this semester, next semester, those are all going to be a part of your transcript and the file that you pass along to college coaches and college admissions offices. So it's important that reflects your effort and the maximum of what you're able to do in the classroom. Right now, it feels like an interruption. It feels like it's a great time to kind of let up and say, I can kind of skate by doing just the minimum. But I promise you that will not set you up for success in the same way that it will be to keep your foot on the gas, keep running full speed through the bag, to use a different baseball expression, and really set yourself up for this semester, next semester, the semester after that, and for the holistic college admissions process. Also, again, obstacles open opportunities. As much as it is not fun to not be on the bus to an away game or getting back at 9 p.m. from that weekend series, whatever it is, not having a season does open up some time in your day that previously you would have dedicated to practice, games, travel, all that stuff that goes into an effective season. And you can use some of that and reallocate it towards standardized test prep, towards the class certainly, but also towards standardized test prep. Standardized tests are and will continue to be an important piece of the admissions puzzle. Given access to tests and cancellations and delays and everything else, there are more schools that at least are testing a test optional period right now, where if you look at a lot of the NESCAC schools or some of these high-level Division III schools or even Division I schools have transitioned to, whether it's just for this year or next year or for the next couple years, a test optional framework for their admissions. A couple things. One, you aren't going to be hurt by submitting a good test score. So even if you're applying to Bowdoin as a test optional school, if you have a good SAT or ACT score, it's not going to hurt you. It could help you as a way to round out your portfolio as a student athlete. Also, the other thing that is a little bit tricky about right now in the standardized test space is that you don't necessarily know what tests you'll have access to or when. April dates canceled, May dates canceled. I believe June dates have been canceled for the SAT and ACT. So you don't know when it's going to open back up. Using this time now to prep as best you can, it's proven that studying and prepping for the SAT boosts your score. Use this time to do that so that you can gain an extra 10, 20, 30, 40 points on those tests to really increase your overall profile. The last point here, and this goes back to a lot of the things that we kind of use to frame this conversation: motivation, discipline, asking for help. Building a routine and sticking to it is really difficult right now, but it's really important. Right now, typically during a typical school year, all of the structure and programming that you have as a student athlete, the team workouts, the practice, the game travel, the academic schedule of being in school, all of that naturally enforces a routine that is, fairly easy to stick to as long as you answer the bell in the morning, because it is all given to you. Right now, you are lacking that external routine in the same way because you don't have to commute to school. You don't have that practice for 2.5 hours after school. You don't have that bus trip. So you need to build your own routine and stick to it in a disciplined way, so that you are still able to make the strides and use this extra time that we're talking about. You have to create this extra time for yourself by making this routine work for you. Otherwise, all these activities are like a gas and they will fill the time that you give them. If you don't have a routine where you say, I'm going to do work from 6 to 8 p.m. and then I'm going to work on standardized testing, then that work can take as long as you let it, or those video games can take as long as you let them. So building this routine, sticking to it, having it be driven from internally, so that you as a student athlete, or mom and dad, you can help a lot here. Helping hold your student athlete accountable to this routine and to this discipline is really, really important right now.
And Max, baseball players, right, as a lot of us are used to habits. Like you just said, they're used to habits. They've been doing this for years and years and years. Some, 10 years old doing, similar things and plugging things in. This is brand new for everybody. This is tough for you. It's tough for me. It's tough for you as parents, student athletes. They need that extra helping hand. So being able to develop the new normal, the new routine is going to be important. And then, like you said, pulling out some of the positives in this. We have an extra 4 hours. What can we do in those 4 hours to put stuff in? Being able to spend time with family and doing all the things that we're kind of, that we talk about, but also plugging in, hey, do I know if I'm going to be better at the ACT or SAT? Let's look at some of the free resources online that we'll talk about, or being able to do a little bit more reading or studying when that time does open up. So I think it's being able to develop the new normal, the new routine, and help your student athlete being able to do that, because this will only, help them as soon as this opens up, whether it be summer or fall, because things will eventually, I hope, get back to normal. And we just want to make sure that we're putting these kids in a situation to succeed as soon as it does open up.
Absolutely. And one kind of clerical note, I know that we are approaching the 1 o'clock hour. We're going to keep going as long as we need to with this, but out of respect for calendars, I know that, the invite originally said noon to 1. So if you guys have to dip out of here or have other obligations, certainly feel free. As I mentioned, we're recording this and we will be sending it out. So feel free to stick around. We'll be here as long as we need to be. But also, if you have other obligations, don't feel like you're going to miss out.
And we will answer everybody's questions to that point afterwards, whether Kevin's writing to them now or certainly after. We will be following up. So don't worry if you do have to get off and you asked a question we didn't get to.
Absolutely. Bullet point here on what student athletes can do specific to their recruiting process. And this is kind of a nested hierarchy because that's how my brain generally works. Recruiting process is one of the 4 areas of focus. And then within recruiting process, there are 4 things that I would advocate, or I would say student athletes should be working on. You see them here. Building your list of schools and doing research on them, communicating with coaches, building out and really cementing your online profile and video, and then also planning for a summer of recruiting that is also taking into account that it's going to look different than you originally planned. So building in some flexibility and some other considerations there. School research and list building. When we talk about, as I mentioned before, we think a lot about holistic fit. And so for us, it's about focusing on the school qualities rather than the labels. Rather than thinking, what is the Ivy League school that I want to go to? It's what's the size of a school? Where is it? How close to home? What is their academic strength? All of that stuff informs the experience in college much more than whether it's Division I, Division II, Division III, Ivy League, SEC, NESCAC, all these different labels that can drive the recruiting process, quite honestly, for student athletes in particular. They impact your experience at that school way less. One example that I like to use is Ivy League. If I talk to a kid and he says, I want to play baseball at an Ivy League school, what that is saying to me is that you are equally interested in a school that is in rural New York that has 15,000 kids and is half public and has a lot of grad schools, as a school of roughly 3,500, 4,000 on the border between Vermont and New Hampshire. Because guess what? Cornell and Dartmouth look very different from each other. They are wildly different experiences in schools. Or if you're saying that you're as interested in Dartmouth as Columbia, rural New Hampshire versus the heart of Manhattan, very different experiences to be working with. So what I always advocate student athletes start with is start with the qualities and then start to think backwards to which schools match these qualities. What is the rough size of the school that I'm looking for that I think I can be successful at? How far away from home do I want to be? Am I thinking about a more science type major, a more liberal arts type major? And how does the schools that I'm looking at, how do they fall into those different categories? Then once you have this list of qualities, then you can start to say, oh, here are the top 10 schools or 20 schools or 35 schools that fit those qualities that I'm thinking about. Another way to use the time that you are not on buses and in practice is there's no excuse right now for baseball players to not be doing the research on these schools that you're looking at. Typically for spring student athletes, I think that spring student athletes are at a bit of a disadvantage because the summer is a heavy recruiting period for all sports. But if you're a soccer player with an active season in the fall, you have a little bit more time in the spring to be doing your research and your coach communication, setting the table for your summer exposure circuit. For baseball players and for spring sports student athletes, there's less of that time because you're in season right up until you then go on the road for your exposure opportunities. So using some of this time to do this research and communicate with coaches is a great way to replace some of the other obligations that you typically would have in a way that directly impacts your recruiting process at your target schools.
And Max, to that point, what we see a lot is we ask student athletes at camp or before camp, what does your school list look like? And sometimes it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because of where they are from an academic standpoint or maybe a baseball standpoint. And this is the time where you're able to go through and do a lot of research on where does this fit? What's the average SAT scores? What are some of the GPAs? The requirements in order to get into that school from an academic standpoint, and then look on the baseball rosters, look at who's on these rosters and look at what their pasts were like. If they're similar, then maybe that's a good sign. If they're not, maybe it's okay. There's going to be a whole lot of other schools. So this is the time to really, trim that list down and say, this really does make sense because it checks all the boxes from what you said from the first bullet point. But then on the second one is I have a realistic shot at actually being admitted to that school or being admitted on, being able to play on that baseball team. So really good ways to just kind of use an hour or two or a couple hours a week to be able to, start to do some of that research. And this is more so for parents because kids aren't going to necessarily have that idea, but parents certainly can.
Absolutely. And this is another way where parents can come in as on this third bullet point as well. And this is what I kind of think of as like the Netflix matching algorithm, where because of what you've watched before, it's going to recommend and say, you might like this other thing. And so you look for these qualities, you find some of the schools that fit them, and then broaden your search to account for other lookalike schools. If you watched X show or you shop for Y on Amazon, it recommends things for you based on those things. So you show up in Netflix and for me it says you like TV comedies with a strong female lead. Great. Now I know that I should go watch The New Girl because I didn't know that show necessarily, but it fits some of the things that I'm looking for. Same with schools. If you're looking at a small liberal arts college 2 hours outside of a city, guess what? Williams should be on your list, Amherst should be on your list, but also Grinnell should be on your list. Thinking about these schools that might not be quite where you are looking. Whereas if you're starting from, I'm looking at NESCAC schools or I'm looking at Ivy League schools, you don't ever consider the Grinnells of the world in the same way, or you don't consider the Washington Lees of the world in the same way. But then once you learn more about these schools, you do your research, it turns out that a lot of these schools offer a really perfect fit. And then you get to get exposure to their coaches and you meet Tim Hollabaugh from Grinnell and you're like, I can't play anywhere else because I love this guy. I need to play for him. So keeping an open mind, thinking from school qualities and keeping an open mind will help you create more opportunities and options for yourself in terms of successful potential recruiting outcomes as well. Coach communication is absolutely crucial during this time. One thing that we've heard a lot from parents is, oh, it's a dead period. I can't talk to coaches, which is categorically false. You can't have face-to-face interactions with coaches, but you can email them, you can text them if you have a pre-existing relationship, you can call them, all these different ways to get in touch with them. And guess what? These coaches also aren't in season, so they have an unprecedented amount of time in their email inbox in front of their computer, and they are looking to start their recruiting in a digital fashion. They are looking to exchange emails with prospective student athletes. They are looking at profiles online to look at video and metrics and data and transcripts to get a sense of who these kids are. So being in touch with coaches right now via email, via the online profiles and those platforms is an absolutely great way to advance your recruiting right now. A couple key points about this is you have to personalize these notes to the coach. It's really easy to just work from a template and copy paste and copy paste and copy paste and send it away to 20 schools really quickly. But guess what? Those form letters are not going to have the same impact as if you personalize the note to each coach, program, and school. It's as simple as getting the coach's name right, getting the school's name right, getting the school's mascot right or nickname right. But it's also, if I'm emailing Babson and I say, Coach Noon, I'm really interested in Babson because I love the entrepreneurship program. I'm thinking about that. Guess what? That shows Coach Noon that I've done my research. I have a demonstrated interest in Babson as a school. I looked at their record from 2020 and 2019. I looked at some of the kids in the roster. Demonstrating that you've made that effort and you've done that research and you pull that into the email communication that you have with a coach is a really good way to stand out in what is honestly a crowded inbox. So personalizing it is a great way to stand out. It's also a really important way to demonstrate interest and curiosity. Whatever you can find in a 10 or 15 minute search on the program's website or on Google or Wikipedia, do that research, but then also you can have some questions beyond that as well. Coach Noon, I'm really interested in Babson's entrepreneurship program. I've read a lot about it. I think it's the perfect fit for what I am thinking about for college and beyond. I have one quick question. How does that program relate to the baseball team? Do you have any entrepreneurship majors who I could talk to in the program to make sure that it's a realistic option? Have answers to what is easily findable, and then have curiosity about the stuff that requires a more personal connection to a player or to the coach, and start to ask some of those questions.
So one thing I'm seeing a lot of questions come in, and something we're going to address anyway is, what else can you do besides email? And you touched upon it, because everybody does email, whether it's now or it was 6 months ago. To me, it's all about switching it up and changing it up a little bit. So being able to pick up the phone and even leaving a voicemail for a coach, or writing a handwritten letter, or being able to follow them on social media and have other ways to be able to connect with these coaches is key. An email, and as long as it's done the right way, is a great way to start, but being able to switch it up throughout to be able to communicate, because yes, there's going to be a lot of people that are sending emails in, but coaches are now going to have more time, like you said, than ever to be able to respond or look. So being able to fire off, and we'll talk about this, but video and profile and being able to mix up the type of communication is going to be really key. And again, this goes back to mom and dad, maybe using what you do in business or what you've done in your own life to be able to help shape what your kid does, because they're not going to know. So like I will tell, our sales team, don't necessarily just call the same person 300 times. In order to get in touch with our folks, we do a number of different things. It's the same way with a college coach as it is in your daily life.
Absolutely. And there are some creative ways to go about this. Like, yes, email, because it's so easy, because it's fast, it's free, like it's going to be the bulk of your communication with coaches. But putting that letter in the mail, picking up the phone and calling, once you get to a level of communication with a coach, texting that coach are all going to be really, really important as you move through the recruiting process. I think about it as a channeling exercise. And so you need to find a channel that you can communicate effectively in and also is not overly crowded. Or if it is crowded, how do you stand out? That's where the personalization comes into play as well. What I would say is, for a student athlete, create a dedicated Instagram page or Twitter account that is your recruiting specific Instagram account, where you're posting stuff and you're following your target programs and you're engaging with your target programs. That's another channel where you can engage coaches. Is if you're retweeting or commenting on a MIT's post about their outgoing seniors, that's a good way to get in touch with Coach Carroll and be on their recruiting radar. Now, it's important and very important to make sure that that social account is cleaned up and possibly even dedicated just to this. So you are demonstrating your commitment to this and not what other interests that you have or the meme account that you might have or anything like that. Have it be focused on your recruiting process is a great way to do that. Proofreading, so important, and it seems very simple and it seems like it should go without saying, but every year I talk to a lot of coaches who say, Max, I got 25 emails this week that all had the wrong coach's name or all had the wrong program's name. Please don't do that. It is really important that these emails be written by student athletes. Coaches want to communicate with student athletes, but mom and dad, this is where you can help a lot as a second set of eyes and making sure that that email to tcarroll@mit.edu says, Dear Coach Carroll, and says engineers and doesn't say Coach Noon Beavers for Babson. Focus on those types of details. Now, coaches know what is written by a 16 or 17-year-old as opposed to a practicing lawyer. So have this be limited to proofreading and suggesting and editing and not writing and rewriting these emails, but it's a really important place where parents can help support their student athletes in the recruiting processes, specifically with coach communication as well.
Hey, I saw one question that just came in, and it works really well here. These emails, in my opinion, should not be coming from the recruiting profiles kind of that you have set up. Have it come from the student athletes, Matt Sternberg 2022 at gmail.com. Set one up. If you don't have one, you can use your school. The kids can use your school accounts. Number of ways to do it, but think about when you get an email, that one from a service may get stuck in junk, but when it's coming from a normal Gmail account, typically that will land in the inbox. That's really important.
No, that's a really good point, Matt. And the other thing I would say is that dedicated email account for your recruiting is something that can be shared between mom and dad or coach, advisor, whatever it is, and student athlete, because as professionals in the business world, we are used to checking email. 16, 17-year-old kids might not be as in that habit of checking email, so they might miss that email that came in from a coach at a program that they're interested in. So having multiple eyes on that, just to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks, can be really important as well. The final P is we do the 3 Ps of coach communication: proactivity. So being proactive. This is always true, but it's especially true right now. As we talked about with the routines of daily life, there are certain things that you aren't getting organically right now that you have to create for yourself. So right now, local coaches might be on the road between their games in the middle of the week to see a local travel game or high school game or whatever it is. But right now they aren't. So while it's always important to be proactive, it's especially important right now because you aren't getting the same organic opportunities that would come about during a typical spring because everything else is shut down. So being proactive, really, really crucial. There's no guarantees for success in the recruiting process, but proactivity and persistence are the 2 things that I would point to as the closest things to guaranteeing a good outcome for you in the recruiting process.
And Max, even if you're not going to get a response from a coach because they get inundated, it's okay. It's what you're sending them that they still may be viewing. So if things do open up and you are able to go to their camp or our camp or whatever that is that we talk about, that they know you and that name is a little bit familiar. You don't need to send 30 emails in 2 weeks, but there's a way to do that, to have that nuance, as Max said, to be able to send them important updates, to be able to give them what they need so they can at least review you, put you on a board, put you on a list somewhere that they're able to then, follow up.
Absolutely. Online profile and video we'll touch on quickly. It can be a complete pain as much as email will drive large parts of your communication with coaches. It can be a real pain to send that email with 10 attachments and the updated transcript and the updated 60 time to each coach on your list. So having an online profile and having everything live on one landing page can be a great way to gain efficiency in your coach communication. Instead of reattaching all those things every time you send an email, can you include a link? You spend the time personalizing the email and don't spend the time having to attach every single thing every time. take that effort and spend it elsewhere in researching the school and personalizing the email. And then at the bottom, you can say, here's all of my up-to-date information. I know that it's up to date because I only have to update it in one place. I know that everything's there, and I know that it is what I need to put in front of coaches. So it can be a great way to gain efficiency and reallocate that time in creating all those PDFs and attaching them towards personalizing the email, doing the school research, all these things that are more important in the coach communication process. The other thing here is that coaches do want to see video of players. Yes, they want to, and they need to see players live. But right now they can't. And so video is a really, really important piece. So having some video on your profile, and we work with a company called Sports Recruits where you can get a free account. They have paid options, but they have a free account where you can upload video. You can have your transcript and all your test scores and your academic information, have everything up there, your contact information. You can upload and edit your own videos there as well. So having video on this profile is a great way to give a coach a sense. If they see, if you say, hey coach, I'm a 6'8", 60 runner, great. If you have a video of yourself running that 60, they get to put their eyes on that in a different way. Or if you have video of yourself hitting, as well as the here's my batted ball exit velocity, both those things go together to give coaches a better sense of who you are. So I would advocate putting in video, even if it's not the most up-to-date video. I know that some things are going to be harder to film right now. You're not going to be able to get live game footage, or there might not be a field that you're able to safely get to right now, but have video from earlier this spring or a winter training session or the fall or last summer. Have something video-wise up in your profile and then date it so that coaches know, hey, this is where I was last August, and here's the hard work I've put in since then, to give them a sense of who you are and who you are becoming as a player as well. And some of this is also video that you can capture very easily with an iPhone. You know, this thing is a kind of a miracle nowadays, and you can go out and get reps of yourself hitting off a tee. Even if you can't get to a field and film yourself with live BP or live ground balls, you can get some kind of video, especially mechanics of hitting, mechanics of pitching, to give a coach a sense of who you are and what your fundamentals are like as well.
And Max, a lot can be done, like you said, with the iPhone, with your student athlete, you or a friend that can take that with a simple free editing software, be able to put that together, even if it is swings in the backyard, even if it's hitting into an net in the backyard or showing mechanics, and being able to take that and put that onto a Sports Recruit free profile, being able to then email that off, or, you know, being able to text a coach, however that may be. Those are the important things that I think we can do. Control the controllables, do what you can now while it's there. And so I think that's really important, you know, to be able to look forward to in the next couple of months.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The last thing that student athletes can do, and families can do, quite frankly, is planning for a summer on the recruiting trail while also building in some flexibility. Now, given the potential for ramifications to this summer's calendar, the NESCAC, for example, has already extended their no face-to-face recruiting period through June 15th. There are camps in early June that are going to be impacted. There are camps in mid to late June, depending on where they are, that could be impacted. So it's going to be more important this year more than ever. Efficiency, always important, but during a potentially truncated recruiting cycle this summer, it's going to be really, really important to get in front of a high volume of schools that could offer the right fit for you. And this doesn't mean going to everything that has 200 or more coaches, because while there might be, if you're at a camp of 200 coaches or a tournament with 200 coaches, but 5 of them the right fit for you, that's less effective and less efficient than being at a camp of 50 or 60 coaches where 20 or 30 of them are could potentially offer the right fit for you academically and baseball wise. So focusing on efficiency with schools that could offer the right fit for you is going to be really, really important this summer, just given the potentially impacted recruiting calendar that we're seeing due to coronavirus. Next up is access to data, analytics, and video. This is another thing that we talked about on the interview that we did with Coach Gordon from Duke that's posted on our blog, where one thing that they're thinking about as a staff is they use a lot of data in their player development. They use data in their recruiting. How can they use seeing a player live and also getting the data analytics video to more quickly get a complete picture of this player? If their recruiting cycle is shortened, and they don't have a chance to see a player that third, fourth, fifth time and get a different coach's eyes on them, how can they combine the whole picture of, yes, they want to see you play and a coach will see you play, but they also are looking at your video. They're able to put that together with a Rapsodo data or Blast data or whatever the case may be, TrackMan data, and use all these different pieces of the puzzle to get a complete picture of you as a player, beyond seeing you play repeatedly over the course of the summer and fall, which might not be the same realistic possibility this year in particular. Proactivity, also a really important piece. And again, if there is a key to success in the recruiting process, I would point to proactivity as a really important bullet on that. In this case, what I mean by proactivity is, whereas before just going about your kind of normal playing schedule would give you some volume of exposure for most travel programs, most high school teams, like they're getting some kind of exposure just organically from the things that they are attending. This year with a shortened schedule, that might not be the case. And so being proactive and seeking out the right opportunities for you is going to be really important, and being a little more judicious and a little more targeted so that you are able to get the right exposure at the right time to the right college coaches in the right format is just something that, again, always important to consider, but this year more than ever could be more impactful given the impact of coronavirus on the sports space, on honestly on globally, and on kind of the situation nationally and around the world.
And Max, these 3 points right here is something that we used 4 months ago on a webinar when we had no idea this was coming up, which is why our events highlight these 3 things right here. They're going to be even more impactful this summer. The events that are going to be out there, you need to make sure that you are super, super efficient in doing that. And why Head First is able to put your student athlete in the right position if the schools are right, or top 96 if your kid wants to stay local and those schools are right, is because it touches on the really, really important parts that college coaches are telling us what they're going to need to see this summer in order to continue on with their recruiting classes. These things right here, are able to check the boxes to be able to make that work. And I think you guys, there's not going to be as many dollars to go around. There's not going to be as much time, and you have to really decide what is going to really work for us. Head First, in our 20 plus years of doing this, has been able to prove that. But this summer, more importantly, you really need to make sure that those decisions are spot on.
And then the last thing here is school-specific camps, and being targeted with repeat exposure and follow-up exposure with school-specific camps, most notably in the late summer and fall, or even winter. Narrowing down that list of 35 potentially fit schools, get efficient exposure to them, have some good conversations with 5 to 10 of them, do a little bit more research, narrow that list to 3 to 5, and get back on those campuses. Those school-specific camps are a really important piece of the recruiting puzzle. You're getting on campus, you're meeting the whole coaching staff, you're meeting some of the guys in the program, and it's another way to get follow-up exposure. Using those effectively and judiciously, specifically for follow-up and repeat exposure in the fall and winter for 2021s before you commit, or for 2022s to really set the table for spring and summer action next year, is going to be really, really important. Again, not anything that is completely new this year, but just being focused and targeted with them in a different way, given the other constraints that we're facing. Quick slide, and just to introduce you to some of the other resources that are out there. This webinar being one of them, certainly, and us at Head First, we are more than happy. We love being a resource for families. There are other people who know things as well, and we certainly don't shy away from that. First, our blog and social media. If you want to follow us, stay in touch with our blog, take a look at some of our posts. We've posted some video series, we've posted some interviews specifically about how recruiting is impacted and how student athletes are going about their recruiting. So take a look there. Follow us on social media to get a sense of kind of what we're doing and what we have out there in the space. In addition,
yeah, Max, one thing with one thing with us is that we're going to continue to be doing these webinars on different topics as we learn more about what the pandemic is going to kind of bring, whether it's our camp specifically, the summer timing, as the NCAA comes out with new things. So being able to follow us on social, you'll hear all kind of the different updates that we have and the topics that you guys want us to discuss.
Absolutely. D1baseball.com, Twitter at D1Baseball is another really great resource that we can stay in touch with. They have a lot of great relationships with kind of the Power 5 type programs around the country. And so they have some of the inside scoop on some things as they develop. And given the kind of shifting landscape around eligibility and scholarships, that's a really good source that I go to quite a bit just to make sure that what I am communicating with families and thinking about is kind of in line with the current thought from them as well. A really important piece of this as well is as much information as we can give you or D1 Baseball can give you, your target programs are going to be the best source for information on those programs. So if you haven't already, cast a broad net and follow your target programs on social media. Follow them on Twitter. Follow the coaches on Twitter if they have a coach Twitter account. Follow them on Instagram. Engage with them. Start to reply to their tweets, retweet them, leave them a comment on Instagram, whatever it is, and start to engage with them there. It's a good way to kind of open up a second front in your relationship with them, but also it's a good way to stay in touch with what they are doing and what the restrictions or situation might be at their programs in particular. In terms of staying up to date on standardized testing and admissions, one source that we go to is Compass Test Prep. The founder of Compass Test Prep is actually an honor roll parent. We went out to San Francisco in early March, right before all this started, and did a couple panels with them. They're incredibly knowledgeable about the standardized testing in the college admission space. So they've put together in their resource center, there's a page that they're updating very frequently with all the different cancellations, postponements, ramifications specifically for standardized testing, SAT, ACT, AP, IB, all the different acronyms that you can stand. So I would stay in touch there. You see there, that's the link to their resource center, which has a lot of their articles. They did a webinar a week and a half ago where they had the Dean of Admission from Cornell, as well as some college counselors on there. Really good source of information about the admissions process and what schools have recently moved to test optional or how long Rhodes has moved to test optional, whatever the case may be. So stay in touch there to stay up to date on that sort of information. For baseball and drill work, there's these sorts of resources are everywhere, including a lot of travel programs that we work with. One here in the DC area that we touch on that's not listed here is Bradley Baseball Academy. They've been doing a lot of stuff on Instagram geared towards here are drills you can do with a very limited set of equipment and limited space. That's the sort of stuff that to be looking for right now, and it's all over the place. Another great resource that we would point to is the ABCA, which is the American Baseball Coaches Association. And one thing that they started doing is every Tuesday night, last night was the first one, every Tuesday from now on, they're doing this thing, ABCA at home. Last night, it was a panel of incredibly knowledgeable coaches on pitching. It was college coaches, it was some pro pitching coaches and minor league pitching coordinators. And it was specifically, they focused in on pitching and pitch development. It was fascinating. I believe they're recording them and I think they have them. If you go to the ABCA Twitter account or you search for this hashtag on Twitter, you'll start to get a sense of what they're doing and be able to stay in touch with that, which again, it's not the only place. These resources are everywhere, but it's a really good one. It's one that we talk with our partnered travel programs about staying in touch with as well. Now we're going to transition to the Q&A, and we're going to stick around here as long as we need to. I know that a lot of questions have come in. Again, if you to get your question asked and answered, you just find the questions tab in the GoToWebinar toolbar, type it right there. We're going to answer as many as we can right now. If it's a personal follow-up or very unique to your situation or you have to go, feel free to fire that question in there. Go to your other obligations. We'll follow up with you over the next couple of days to get you on the phone or get you on email to schedule a time and just make sure that we answer every last question that could be coming in. I'm going to leave, as we transition to questions, I'm going to leave this resources page up here with the addition of our contact information. If you go to our website, we also have a live chat function. So if you have questions, just a quick question, you don't want to open up your email and email us about it. If you go to our website, type it in there. Our team's standing by to answer your questions there. So we're going to turn it over to Q&A now and to Kevin very soon. Matt, before we do, I know you want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the dates and some of the stuff that we have going on for Honor Roll and Top 96 specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was saying before, as all of our summers are, going to be in flux a little bit. And, are a lot of questions that we have, whether it's coming in or to us and our team is, what is going to be this summer. So just so you know, all of our events that are scheduled are currently on as planned. That obviously is a fluid situation that we're looking at week after week. But what I can tell you is we will get on the field this summer. We are working with every partner that we have, with whether it's our coaches, our facilities, our staff, to be able to make that happen. And efficiency, as I said before, is going to be really, really important, more so than ever. We always look to results, because at the end of the day, when you're going to spend money on baseball, whether it's your, great travel program or a camp or a school-specific camp, make sure it's worth your time now, so more than ever. So at Head First, we've recently come out with, a new blog post on this, but, as of this season, unfortunately, obviously cut short, over 1,400 kids are playing college baseball where, they met those coaches at our event. So we know that this does work. We know that for those kids that need to speed this up a little bit, or really make sure you're honing in on the right schools and the right process, the Top 96 camps, which are our local regional showcases in a number of different cities, and our Head First camps, which are more the high academic, more schools out there, they are the ones that are going to be really, really helpful for you. And we're more than happy to see, are you the right fit? Is there something we can do to help you be able to secure a spot and do it at a relatively risk-free situation? So that's just a little bit there. Certainly turn it over to Kevin so we can start to answer some questions.
Great, thanks guys. First question here, which is a question we get, every year, is about taking a gap year or taking a PG year. Do we think that there will be an increase this year because of everything going on? Are coaches going to start viewing this as more routine? What are your thoughts on that process?
That's an excellent question. And a PG year or a gap year is something that I talk with a lot of families about each and every year. But there's a lot of good reasons to do a PG year. There's a lot of reasons to take that gap year: physical development, academic development, maturity, making sure that you're finding the right fit, getting another hack at the recruiting process. It's such a one-off basis. I do think you probably will see more players take advantage of that now, just because for the 2021 class, if there is this roster crunch, you might get college coaches who say, we have a spot for you, we want you, but we'd love it if you actually did a PG year and came in a year later when some of this stuff has worked itself out. Also, you're going to see more. So it could be driven by college coach preference as well, or at least like college coach kind of suggestion. Or you also will see, I think, more student athletes go through it to kind of give themselves more of a chance to become more and more competitive and develop physically. So you probably will see an increase in it. I do still think it's not like it's not a cure-all. It's not a miracle cure for anything in the recruiting process. It is still very much a personal and one-off consideration. It will be the perfect fit for some kids who are going through this process now. It was the perfect fit for some kids who are going through this process 2 years ago. And for others, it wasn't the right fit, and it won't be the right fit. So it's certainly something to consider, and there are more and more kind of opportunities opening up in that direction. But I do still think it's a case-by-case basis for if you are considering it. I think it could be a great option, kind of keep those things, those different aspects in mind.
But Max, and we talked about this before, don't necessarily do that just because of what's going on right now. I think it's got to work for you in terms of how you saw the next 4 or 5 years of your life turning out. Now, obviously, we're all still figuring that part out, but I do think you shouldn't necessarily just change your entire, kind of outlook on where this is going because of where we are and say, I have to take a gap year because of this for baseball. It still has to work, because in 3 years down the line, as things hopefully start to normalize, you don't want that to be a decision that just wasn't part of the plan.
Absolutely.
Great. We're getting a lot of questions also. I know we talked about this earlier, but with spring athletes getting an extra year of eligibility, some of the ripple effects from that. We know that we're going to see, some of those changes for, a couple of years, But Max, you talked about some of the factors that will limit those ripple effects, kids getting jobs, schools not taking fifth-year seniors. Can you just go over that list again for families who are still wondering about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that you will see rosters at the Division III level where there's no cap. You'll see them bigger. You'll see more red shirts, more transfers at the Division I level. Next year, you'll see rosters that are certainly swollen. There will be a roster and scholarship crunch to some degree at most programs. Some of the factors that will limit that. So next year, the fact that there's a waiver eliminates that as a hard difficulty for college programs. They can have extra people, they can give extra scholarships, so you won't see it have instant clear-cut ramifications for the class of 2020. What you will see is more crowded rosters, more competition for playing time, more kids transferring. For 2021s, the things that will limit it are the MLB draft, especially Power 5 schools, the MLB draft returning back to normal and expanding their the rounds in their draft. More kids will then leave these rosters for professional baseball. They'll start drafting high schoolers again, and so there will be some attrition in their incoming recruiting classes, which you probably won't see this year with a likely 5 or 10 round MLB draft. Two are unrelated technically, but the MLB draft does impact the realities of NCAA baseball because of, especially in baseball, because draft eligible juniors and some sophomores, and also the fact you can get drafted out of high school does shift the recruiting conversation for baseball uniquely as a sport. But I think that especially with the programs that we work with, the focus is on baseball and athletics being additive, but not definitive in the college experience and the college recruiting process. So these kids are going to these high academic schools because they want to have the best outcome after baseball. And for a lot of them, that means jobs. And so kids are going to leave college at the scheduled time, even if they have eligibility, because they're like, look, I love my college baseball experience. I'm ready to go on to the next phase of my life, which is this job offer that I have waiting for me. And I think especially, or this grad school that I have waiting for me, whatever it is, especially at the high academic schools, you'll see more of that as opposed to kids necessarily sticking around, paying an extra year of college tuition, which is another really important factor for families to consider. At some of those other Power 5 schools where you might be on a partial scholarship or it's cheaper to do, whatever the case may be. So I think that the cost of it to families, the job opportunities waiting for you, and also quite honestly, the honest communication from college coaches is also going to limit it, because they already are having frank conversations with some seniors in their program saying, yes, you can return next year if you want to, but I'm telling you now, you're going to be competing for a job in the fall, and I don't have a scholarship for you for budgeting standpoint. So those frank conversations are also going to, over the years, limit some of the kids who are going to come back for a fifth year as well.
And Max, even with some of those Power 5 schools, and let's take the high academics out of it for a second, because some of our top 96 schools or other schools that we don't see, there's not every kid that plays on this team is going to the draft. Not every kid is going to, try to make it at the next level. They may want to stay in baseball. They may want to go to law school to become a general manager. They may want to get into coaching. They may want to open up their own facility, whatever that may be. So there's a lot of kids that are ready because, they're still going to have to come back and potentially pay $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 for school that may not necessarily be there, all to just play another season. So I think there's a lot that goes into it. And there's certain coaches that we've seen, certain schools that we've seen that have already come out and said, we're not going to accept it from any of our spring sports, some of the big ones. And I think we may continue to see that as well.
Great. A lot of questions also about online recruiting profiles. Makes a lot of sense with everything going on. They could be super helpful right now. So trying to kind of bunch a couple of them up here. Mm-hmm. Do we have one that we would recommend? What kind of information should you put on there? And then one really great question, once you have it made, where should you put it? Should you put it on Instagram, in your Twitter bio, send it out to coaches? What do you do with it once you're done?
I like the way that this question is thinking, because it's thinking about really what the benefit that we see of online profiles is that it is a landing page or a landing spot that you can then use in all the channels that you have, social media, email, text, whatever it is. You can then distribute this one thing. So we work with sports recruits, and the team there, quite frankly, is a team that I really, really like. We've had a lot of talks in getting us onboarded with their two CEOs, who both happen to be Wesleyan lacrosse grads from a couple of years before me. So there was a little 3 connection with Amherst and Williams, rivalry connection somewhere in between those. But I think that their focus on the customer experience and on getting coaches engaged with their platform, and that is where they're focused. Yes, they have paid subscription options, and yes, it's very easy to self-service, and they have some recruiting content, and they have advisors, but their main thing is delivering this recruiting profile in the best way possible. And so they're focused on product, they're focused on coach experience, and they're focused on player experience in a way that I think is really good. As you may be able to imagine, there's a lot of these profiles out there. There's a lot of these companies out there, and we have been approached by literally every single one. And we have never partnered before this year. We haven't had this exclusive partnership with a profile like this. And it took a lot, quite honestly, to get us comfortable with doing that, and it took a lot of conversation with their team. So that's the one that I would recommend, just based on their focus. And yes, put it in your Twitter bio, put it in your Instagram bio, put it in your signature of every email you send, put it wherever you can, and just get as many eyes on that as possible. The other thing is, and I was exchanging emails with their CEO yesterday, they are seeing more site traffic during this time as well, especially towards profiles that have video. So video viewership, like minutes of viewer videoship, is astronomical. The number of page visits from coaches and logins from coaches is way up because coaches have all this time. So right now is a really good time to make sure you have a profile, have it completed, and also have it built out with whatever video you can access, so that you can get eyes on it. Yes, you want to send it out by email and put it in your Twitter bio, Instagram bio, but also the platform itself does deliver some coach eyeballs organically as well.
And Max, they have a lot of different profiles that you can set up with them. So it's not necessarily we have to go out there and you have to spend $800 to get everything set. There's going to be stuff that's out there that's like that, if that's in your budget, if that's something that you want to make that push on. But there's also free profiles that you can set up. So make sure you guys go check that out, because it's a nice way, like Max said, to centralize everything where coaches are used to going to. And that's the key, is keeping them in their comfort zone, so that way they know they can go from kid to kid to kid. So
Great. Another question that's been coming up, and I know we're not going to have a super specific answer here, but some questions about how academic requirements are going to be impacted at each school. What can families do to get more information on those changes?
Great question. I imagine this is specifically like with reference to grades being pass-fail for some schools, some high schools and not others, and standardized testing and all this stuff. And the short, unfortunate answer, as Kevin alluded to, is it's going to depend on the specific school. It's also a great conversation for you to have with the coaches that you are talking to, right? They're going to have a connection at admissions who's going to have a very good idea of what their admissions department is doing. And so having these conversations as you move down the recruiting funnel with coaches is going to be really important. It's not necessarily the first step is like, texting Coach Rottinger from Air Force and saying, hey, coach, testing is still required. How do I do that? But I think that staying up to date with the changes by following your programs and also their admissions departments or the college, like don't just follow Amherst baseball on Instagram and Twitter, follow Amherst College, follow Amherst admissions if there's one, do that sort of thing so you can stay in touch with this. The other resource, as I alluded to, is the Compass Test Prep. And also this is where kind of everybody is in the same boat. And I come back to that a lot because even if a lot of more schools are going test optional, great. There are some that aren't going to. They also understand that they are not a test optional school and that testing options for this spring and summer are severely limited if they're available at all. Testing centers have not opened up again. Tests have been canceled that were registered for. They also understand that everybody is in that same boat. And so communicating with admissions, communicating with the coaches that are recruiting you is going to be really important, just to say, hey, coach, I know I need to get a test for this school. I can't do that in my area. what can I do next? Can you put me in touch with someone? Do you have an answer to this question? What can I do to make sure that I'm setting my admissions profile and my transcript and my application up for success in this process?
Awesome. Going back to sort of general recruiting questions here, we did have one come in about the Division III timeline. When can coaches start making those verbal offers and really communicating on recruiting specific conversations with players?
So for Division III specifically, they don't have the same pull in admissions that a Division I program does. The level of pull differs between different Division III, different Division Is. Vanderbilt has a very different level of pull in their admissions than Duke, even though they're competitive in the baseball field, whatever. It is a case-by-case basis. Division III, because they don't have the same pull, they need to see a pretty complete academic profile before they move forward with the recruiting and commit process, which generally means 3 full years of a high school profile or a high school transcript and standardized test scores if they're a school that requires that. So for that reason, the recruiting process at Division III schools, and especially at high academic Division III schools, really, really heats up the summer between junior and senior year for student athletes. Most, if not all, Division III coaches will enter that summer with 0 recruits in their incoming class, and they will end that September with their entire class committed. September, October, November, like they will have their class committed between June 1st or whenever their season ends and the early admission deadline for the most part. So this summer between junior and senior year is really, really crucial for high academic schools in general, but especially for those Division III programs. It also is really, really important for the high academic D1s as well. That's when at the Ivy League, the Patriot League, you'll see a lot of movement during that time period for their incoming class in that same summer window as well.
Max, to that point though, I do want to mention, like we always say this, being able to get out a little bit early. So for those 2022s, those 2023s that are like, great, I'll just wait until in between my junior and senior year. It doesn't work like that. A lot of the kids that are going to be going to events like ours or to those school camps or playing in tournaments in front of these coaches have had an opportunity to lay some groundwork with these coaches to be able to shake their hands, to be able to have a conversation. It may not be about recruiting, but just understanding who these kids are. So when it is that right time for them to be able to check the boxes of my SAT scores, my ACT scores, even with the changes that we're seeing right now, that they're able to say, really good kid, is able to combine academics, his personality, what he's able to do on the field to be the right fit for Amherst, for, Harvard, whatever that may be.
Absolutely. What else we got,
Great.
Kevin?
Another great question coming in, right? Yeah. If you want to reach out to coaches, but you didn't have a chance before sort of all these changes happened to get updated metrics, should you hold off on emailing coaches? Should you still try and give them some sort of update, whether it's about your training or your grades? How exactly do you go about that when you don't have like very new and exciting information?
So I do not think that that should be a reason to not reach out to coaches. You should still reach out to them, include those all metrics with a date. So if it's a 60 time or a batted ball velocity, include, I ran a 7.2 last summer. I've done some speed work. I'm, going to retest it again soon, whatever. Also, for a lot of this, if you have access to green space and can safely get to it, this isn't something that you need vetted by a PBR or a perfect game or by us. This is something that you can do yourself as well. One thing to include in your video is if speed is a part of your game and you want to include 60, take a video of yourself running a 60 on a football field from one goal line to the other 40-yard line and film it with the stopwatch in the corner of the screen. And you can get a pretty good sense of, like, coaches can look at that and say, okay, I know that it's 60 yards. I saw the time and I know that you didn't, speed up the clock or run it in slow motion or anything like that. There's nothing wonky about it. So they can get a good sense of that without it being like a stamp seal of approval official time from some sort of third party. You can still communicate that. And I don't think that you should wait on that to communicate with coaches. You can still communicate with them with old data or unofficial data and just use whatever you have to advance your recruiting, especially right now. Coaches are gonna get it that there's more limited access to these things right now.
Great. Just being mindful of time here, we're going to go with 2 or 3 more questions. If your question doesn't get answered right now, I'll stay on the Q&A after and message you. We can also have someone from our team shoot you an email after. One of the questions that just came in, how can high school coaches help in the recruiting process right now?
Great question. A really key way that I think that they can is being a resource for their student athletes. The recruiting process does need to be driven by student athletes. They are the ones in the driver's seat. It is their process. But the adults around them, the travel coaches, the hitting instructors, the pitching coaches, the high school coaches, the parents, they can all be great resources for them and helping them find the right fit, be a sounding board, edit emails, give them a good shot at what could be the right fit. In that vein, I think that, and this is, I think, a little counterintuitive, the number one thing that a high school coach can do to help their kids in the recruiting process is go see as much college baseball as possible. College coaches talk to kids' coaches, or a high school coach or travel coach reaches out to someone and says, hey, Coach Carroll, I have the perfect player for MIT. And if Coach Todd Carroll knows and trusts that coach, it can go a really long way. But a lot of things that I hear from college coaches is they get that call or they get that email and they say, this coach has never seen my program play. They don't know what it takes to play at Chapman. We're a Division III national champion. They don't know what it takes to play at Amherst or MIT or Vanderbilt. Like these schools that aren't on TV. I think that a great thing a high school coach can do to be a good resource to their players is go see as much college baseball as possible and get a sense of what it takes to play at these schools that you don't see on TV. What does it take to play at a William and Mary or a Richmond as opposed to a Duke or a Vanderbilt or a Michigan? What does it take to play at a Bates as opposed to an Amherst? What does it take to play at a Washington Lee as opposed to a Catholic University? Seeing a lot of these people play as much as possible is a great way to get a sense of that. And then you can be a better resource about level setting with your kids and saying, I've seen you play. I know how you are as a player. I've also watched all these different college programs, and I think you fit right about here. And I can kind of start to be a good resource and point that player in the right direction.
Great. Another question, sort of about the impact of roster sizes and some seniors staying on. Max, I think we might, not going to be a perfect answer here. It might be something that we draw an experience from with this one, but is seniority a factor with coaches in like determining playing time and roster spots? So is that something that players would have to worry about next year as incoming freshmen?
It might be. I mean, it does depend on the program and on the coach. One thing so I played for an old school coach at Amherst, Bill Thurston, for 2 years, and he said the first day we were there, he said, if a senior and a freshman are tied in terms like they are equal contributors to the team, I am always going to play the freshman because I have 4 more years to get that kid better and more competitive. The senior, you're on your way out. So it also could work in the other direction where if a coach has a feeling of loyalty or investment in a kid, they could start the senior over the freshman. I think that it does depend, but yes, it can matter, but it doesn't necessarily always mean senior trumps junior trumps sophomore trumps freshman. It actually could work in reverse depending on how the coach is thinking about not just that year in their program, but the future of their program as well.
Great. And last question I'll throw your way here. Again, I'll stay on for a little bit and answer some of the questions that are coming in. But how do the recent changes affect non-graduate eligible players who are still looking to transfer? So sophomores and juniors this year who still want to transfer to a new program, will they still have to sit out? How exactly will they be impacted by this?
So that's a great question. And the whether or not there's a one-time waiver is actually still, to my understanding, being decided by the NCAA or being considered and then decided by the NCAA. Right now, if you're transferring between Division I schools, you would have to sit out for a year. They're thinking about, and again, this is where D1 Baseball is a much better resource than I am, but the indication that I'm getting from the writers at D1 Baseball is that they are looking at this because there's going to be so many transfers. Right now, the transfer portal is going to be more crowded than it has ever been with graduate transfers who are just graduating in 2020, but also with kids, the normal volume of kids, which is still really high of all years of college. So yes, it's going to be a more crowded transfer market. Whether that means the NCAA is going to make some kind of allowance or waiver where if you transfer between this window, you don't need to set out a year, that remains to be seen, but it's a really interesting question. But I do think that the transfer market is going to be more liquid and more crowded than it has been in previous years. And that has been a trend that has gone up, which again, I think points to considering holistic fit in the process is the ultimate win. Because if you look at the transfer portal last spring or this spring, it's something like 10 to 15% of college rosters, Division I rosters, are on the transfer portal, which means that 10 to 15% of kids are not happy with their college experience. And that's just baseball players. So thinking about all the things that go into the college experience on and off the field is the most important thing. And that can help, limit the need for a transfer as well, in my opinion, or the way that I would look at the process.
Great. Again, I think that's it for all the questions. I'll stay on and answer a couple more, but in terms of the live Q&A, I think we can wrap it up right there.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time today. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions at all, always feel free to reach out, hop on our website and get in our live chat, send us an email, give us a call. We're, as you can tell, all working remotely, but we are standing by to make sure we get your questions answered. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, guys.